This is actually really, really nice. The Dream Stealer does look quite a lot like this. You are not allowed to do this these days, so please don't try. We have a friend. We have a friend. Who's this? All right, we're approaching an area inside this pyramid now, which doesn't actually exist, but is really great fun. Hi everybody, welcome to Echoes of History. My name is Gemma Renshaw. I'm an archaeologist and Egyptologist, and I was the co-host of a project that was called Playing in the Past, where we used Assassin's Creed Origins to teach people about ancient Egyptian history. So I'm really excited now to take you on a little tour of Assassin's Creed Origins. The plan is that first we're going to take a look at the Giza Plateau. So we're going to start at the Great Sphinx, and then we are going to have a little walk around the Great Pyramid, visit the second pyramid, wander around in the desert, and then we're going to move on to a place called Letopolis, followed finally by somewhere called Krokodilopolis, bit of a mouthful, where we're gonna hopefully meet the son of a god. If you enjoy this video and would like to see more like it, please like and subscribe to Echoes of History. Alright, so what we're looking at here is the Great Sphinx at the Giza Plateau. The Great Sphinx is a monumental statue. It's got a lion's body and a human's head. You can see in this shot here that he is wearing a headdress and he's wearing a beard. He's got a nice red face painted. This is all something that we think was probably very likely. As we're walking around him here, you can see that the body is kind of made up of sort of bricks on the lower part, and it looks like he's very eroded. The Sphinx is in fact pretty old. We think he was probably built around 2600 to 2500 BCE by a pharaoh called Khafre. Khafre is the pharaoh who built the second pyramid on the Giza Plateau. We're not fully sure. This is just conventional theory, but it does sort of make sense. And I feel like until we reach a point where we get some more evidence, it's probably a nice idea for us to just go with the theory. But yeah, the Sphinx is kind of an unusual one actually, because he's a giant monument that is on his own. Sphinxes traditionally in ancient Egypt tend to have a pair or sometimes even lots of them all in a row. So it's a little bit unusual that he's here by himself. I think that what they've done here with this is actually a really nice representation, because in this time period, the Sphinx is already very old. So it wouldn't be in perfect condition. You wouldn't expect to see it in perfect condition. And what you're seeing there with all the bricks is not just modern. In modern times, he does look a bit like this too, but it's lost the paint from almost everywhere. But you do see the bricks, and the bricks were put there by people over a long period of time. So the pharaoh who built it probably didn't put any bricks. It was probably just carved straight out of the rock. But over time, got sanded up, got eroded. Other pharaohs of later periods then came back and decided, oh, well, I'm going to repair it. I'm going to repair and restore this monument. And over time, that is what has happened. Right up to quite recently, in fact. I think the last ones were probably maybe the 1940s or something like that. But it's been a sort of long stretch of time where people have been trying to restore this statue. He's wearing a headdress, as I said. The headdress is called a Nemes headdress, which is associated with kingship. And as you can see, there's a statue underneath him as well of a king standing. He's also wearing the Nemes headdress. This is to do with demonstrating that you are the king, basically. It's sort of associated with kingship. The little statue that's in front of him, we do actually have some evidence for that having been there, even though it's not there now and there aren't really any sort of traces, but there are stela, which are slabs of rock with writing on, and they are deposited in places around the necropolis here being the Giza Plateau. And some of them actually mention there having been a little statue underneath the beard, but whether or not who it was, we don't really know. This stela here is actually slightly different. What we're looking at here now is something that's known as the Dream Stela. This was put here by a king called Thutmose IV, probably around 1,000 or so years after the Sphinx had already been built there. So to him, it was also an ancient monument already. And what this is he is trying to, we think anyway, he's trying to sort of legitimize his power by associating himself with something ancient, which they associated with a kind of god of the area. The god was called Hor-em-Akhet, Horus in the horizon. By associating yourself with a god, you legitimize your claim to the throne if it's a bit sketchy. This is actually really, really nice. The Dream Stela does look quite a lot like this. They've taken, not the hieroglyphs, but the shape, the colour, and like the overall layout, really pretty good and accurate to what is actually there. It's really nice. Again, statue, not sure about that because we don't really know who that was supposed to be, if it was actually there. But as we climb up here, yep, you can see nice beard on him. The beard is gone now. There are little parts of it in various places, one including being at the British Museum. So yeah, we get a nice view from up on top of his head, something that we are not allowed to do anymore. Don't recommend you try it. So what you're looking at there, over in front, there are a couple of temples, and one of them is imaginatively known as the Sphinx Temple, which is associated with the Sphinx Monument. As I said, it is associated with Hor-em-Akhet, Horus in the horizon, and the other temple was Khafre's Valley Temple. Now as we're going down the back of the Sphinx on the left-hand side, you could just see the causeway which leads up to the mortuary temple, which is next to the pyramid. But we'll come to that when we get to the pyramid, I think. Just enjoy the Sphinx while we can. So this view is looking at the Great Pyramid. So the Great Pyramid was built by someone called Khufu. This was the first pyramid that was put on the Giza Plateau. Again, built somewhere between 2600 and 2500 BCE. You can see just on the left there, that's his mortuary temple just in front of it. This is the east side of the pyramid that we're on. Not a lot remains of that temple anymore. I think it just has its sort of foundation level now, but it does have a very nice basalt paving, which you can still look at. What we're seeing here, you might be looking at it thinking, that's not what that looks like. And that's because that version of the pyramid that we're looking at still has the limestone casing attached to it. So all of the pyramids here were cased with this really, really fine white limestone from a quarry called Tura. And this, over the years, was removed for other building projects. So at this time in the Ptolemaic, which is, I think we are around 40-ish BCE here. So the pyramid is still sort of old, well, very old, but it's not yet been fully quarried for materials by other people. As we're coming down this side now, this is the north side of the pyramid, which is where the entrance is. You can kind of just see there's like a little triangular bit. That is the original entrance, and it would have been covered. So the stone would have gone all the way down. And actually, I think at this period in time, that entrance would have still possibly been covered. We do have some evidence from the Roman historians, Strabo and Pliny the Elder, who visited Egypt in their eras and mentioned coming to the pyramids. And there is some indication that it might have already been open at that time, but not really clear. But I think what we're looking at here is basically what the entrance looks like today. So if you were to visit the pyramid today, you wouldn't see any of this nice limestone casing. Most of it would look like what you're seeing around the entrance, where it's kind of bricks that are in steps. And there are actually two entrances. So the main entrance where that little arch is, and then a hole was tunneled in by somebody. And that is actually the tourist entrance now. Oh, hello, friends, desert friends. So we're walking around now to the west side of the pyramid. And I believe on this side you'll soon see the Western Cemetery. There are a lot of other burials around the pyramids. It's not just the pyramids. So there we go. We can see now this is the Western Cemetery. And the Western Cemetery was a place where people who worked for Khufu were buried. So these type of tombs are called mastaba tombs, and they are sort of like a brick shape. Actually, lots of these tombs were prepared during Khufu's lifetime, and then when he died, quite a few of them were left empty or unfinished. So I think that people then sort of moved on to the next pharaoh, because the next pharaoh didn't build his tomb on the Giza Plateau. The people who would have been buried in these tombs would have been officials. They would have been wealthy members of the elite, people who served the pharaoh. And he had a lot of people who served him, a lot of people. So the cemetery is quite big. But actually, this cemetery got even bigger after he died because people wanted to be associated with him. So in this time period, beliefs about the afterlife were slightly different to later on. So I'm sure that, people will have seen that there are lots and lots and lots of tombs in ancient Egypt from all different time periods. At this time period, you really needed to be close to the king to try and assure yourself a place in the afterlife. So the king in this time period, part of the reason why we think that the entrances to the pyramids were on the north side was because one of the ways that the king could resurrect himself or be reborn was to rejoin the northern stars where the gods were. This wasn't really something that regular people could do. So their best chance for some sort of, continuation of life was to be close to the pharaoh, who would be reborn and presumably would need his servants again. They're actually quite ruined now, these tombs. These are pretty nice, though. They're good shape. They do look sort of roughly like what you would expect to find here. I'm not sure about the colour. The colour is... Well, they are the colours that you would find, for sure. I just don't know if the tops of those are actually like that. But that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter at all. This is indeed what you would expect to find here if you were taking this approach up to Khafre's pyramid. We're looking at Khafre's pyramid now, and you can see that it has the limestone casing on it. Again, it looks a little bit more perfect than Khufu's one in this kind of shot. You probably noticed as well that it's got a different colour, and that lower part of the pyramid is in fact made of pink granite. There's not a lot of it remaining anymore, but it was there. Whether there was that stripe, Don't really know. I think that might just be decorative here, but yeah, the granite actually would have been there all the way around on the lower courses there of the pyramid. That's pretty accurate to what is in fact there. So we're looking through a little gap here, and this gap is in what would have been the enclosure wall. So most pyramids had an enclosure wall and a pyramid court, and they had a mortuary temple that was on the east side of the pyramid. Certainly these ones are all on the east side of the pyramid. A causeway that led down. We saw it before for Khafre's pyramid where we were looking at the Sphinx. The causeway goes down to the Nile Valley where there was a valley temple. In ancient times, the Nile was both, we think, a bit closer to the pyramids. The riverbed has shifted a little bit. But also there would have been little harbours that were put there, or quays, because the river would flood every year. So the river doesn't do this anymore because it's got a dam down in the south of the country, which stops it from doing it. But it meant that every year there would be a time when the river would be much, much higher, so you could move things more easily to places like this. So we've gone inside the Pyramid of Khafre now, the second pyramid, and we're going down this descending passage. Having been in here, this is actually quite like this, although it's even smaller. you have to bend over to go down this. I mean, it has a little sort of wooden steps in it now so that you don't fall, but you do go down for quite a long time in this sort of dark, and it's not good for people who have claustrophobia. We're making our way towards the burial chamber. So the burial chamber in this pyramid is, I believe it's cut into the bedrock. Here we are, we're in here now. So there's a sarcophagus, bit sunk into the floor. This chamber, as you can see, is empty. We would expect there to have been grave goods in here, and obviously the body as well, but nothing was found in there. So there is actually an Arabic graffito in here from, I think it's from the 13th century CE, and it's a little bit, when I went in there I didn't see it myself. It's a little bit dwarfed, I think, by the later European graffito which is in there, which is painted across the wall from 1818 by a man called Belzoni. This chamber would have housed the body, and it would have housed burial goods. Unfortunately, we don't have that many examples of tombs that were found intact from any period. Very, very small amount. I actually really like that there's still bits of wood, and maybe not the brazier, but the ropes and little kind of bits of debris that are there from presumably either building or interring the king, because we think of things like this as always being very clean and very tidy. You know, what you sort of see now is a very curated monument. When you go to visit it, you're not going to find stuff just lying around. But I think there probably would have been, because it would have taken quite a bit of work to inter the king. And, you know, people, if they were blocking the passages and everything before they left, then they probably would have just left stuff like that lying around. All right, we're approaching an area inside this pyramid now, which doesn't actually exist, but is really great fun. Here we go. So we've entered a room which has some pillars in it, and there are texts on the walls there and some sort of boat thing in the middle. This is not something that you would have found at this time period, or possibly ever inside you would never really expect to find it inside a pyramid, but it is certainly the sort of thing that you would expect in the later periods as part of a tomb chapel or something like that. Now, what we're looking at here, and is actually really fun thing about the game, is that they have taken the idea that, well, the king wasn't in his coffin, so where was he? You know, we found nothing in the burial chamber, so surely he had grave goods. Where are they? And I think that the idea that there is a secret room or something of that nature is very attractive to people, you know, and it's fun to think about. So they have put this into the game to make it fun and interesting. So what you're finding here is basically an idea of what might that secret room have been like, what might be hidden, you know, still inside the pyramid. And she's just going to go up into the burial chamber up at the top here, and you'll see that there's a coffin in here and there are some grave goods. These statues, again, not really, you wouldn't really find this here, but as part of this kind of exploration, if you like, of, you know, what could it have been like, I think that's fine. Okay, so we're now approaching what in the game is the real burial chamber. And here we go. We have some grave goods and a very nice sarcophagus. Sarcophagus is a bit imaginative. They would actually have had this kind of niched facade at this time. That's kind of the right sort of era for there to be that type of niche facade. Not the texts, though. But it would also potentially have been in granite. So, you know, a little bit of Old Kingdom, a little bit of New Kingdom. This is what we've got, what we're looking at right here. The little box that we just saw, though, is based on a real artifact, and many of the items that they've used in the game are based on real artifacts. So when they created the game, they basically looked for real examples of things, and even if they put them into a different context within the game, they did actually use a real example. So as we are climbing the pyramid now, you can see the really nice white limestone casing. The way that these cracks are is really just to facilitate climbing. You are not allowed to do this these days, so please don't try. When we get to the top of this pyramid, we will see, we'll be able to see the Giza Plateau in general, so we'll be able to see what other monuments are around that we haven't been able to see from where we were on the ground. You can also sort of see, as we're climbing here, that at the top there is a sort of darker piece of stone up there. That item there is it's the point of the pyramid. We call it a pyramidion or capstone. And the one that's here on this pyramid is, in the game, it's granite. This doesn't survive anymore. There aren't any on any of them. So kind of, we don't really know whether this would have been different or not. Possibly. There is a kind of long-standing idea that they might have been covered in gold. I think that's fairly unlikely, and I don't think we have any evidence for it, but the main reason I think it's unlikely is just because it would attract people to try and take the gold. You know, even if it was only gilded, because obviously a solid gold capstone would be really heavy, probably as heavy as this piece of granite. We can see some other pyramids in the distance there. These pyramids are even older. And you can see Memphis as well, which was the administrative capital in the Old Kingdom, what we're dealing with here. And basically, they lived on that side of the river, on the east in Memphis, and they had their necropolis on the west side of the river. So all of these, there are pyramid fields kind of across this whole area as you go south towards Memphis. We're looking down towards the Sphinx again, middle right side. The causeway goes past him. And then to the left of that is the Eastern Cemetery and various small pyramids. I'm not sure how well you can actually see them, but there are some small pyramids there which were pyramids of queens. And the Eastern Cemetery here was really for members of the royal family. I love this view up here. It's so beautiful. They did such a great job of getting the feel of the area. And now we get to slide down, my favourite part. You can see, actually, on this side, you can see one of the little subsidiary pyramids that's associated with this pyramid. The ones we were looking at were associated with Khufu's pyramid, but these ones are associated with Khafre's pyramid. And the third pyramid that is on the Giza Plateau, Menkaura's pyramid, also has them. His pyramid is a lot smaller than the other two, but it's also got a lot more granite in it. So it's possible that, you know, he was sort of thinking, well, to make up for it being smaller, we'll use a much more difficult material. Not sure that's a great idea, but you know, it is what it is. People make these kind of weird decisions. All right, so we're calling our horse. Hup. And we're riding now. We're just within the enclosure wall. Having your own horse is a little bit of a luxury, let's say. I think it's fairly unlikely that most people would have had their own horse here. They were mainly used for military purposes. And actually also riding horses wasn't done that much in ancient Egypt. So they didn't have horses for a long time either, actually. The horses that they did have came to them, I think probably around 1700 BCE. So they had quite a bit of time when they didn't have horses at all, and they would have just used donkeys and oxen as draft animals. Oh, hello. We have a friend. We have a friend. Who's this? We forgot about this.
Whoa.
That was nice. I think I'm not actually sure what he's supposed to be, but he looks like some sort of desert spirit. Anyway, let's we imagined it probably. So yeah, the horses came to Egypt quite late, or well, in the middle of their history, let's say. There would have been horses here in the Ptolemaic period. It's just that they mostly would have been for military purposes. Some of the elite might have had them, but yeah, it really was much more common for people to have donkeys as their own mode of transport, if they had anything like that at all. And in fact, the river really has always been the best way to travel around Egypt, and it still is. So having a boat or having access to a boat was probably much more likely for most people.
Whoa.
All right, so we have arrived at the city of Letopolis, or ancient Chem. This city is the capital of the second nome of Lower Egypt. So each section of Egypt, so Egypt is divided into Lower Egypt, which is the delta area, and Upper Egypt, which is the long river valley area. In these kind of two separate parts, there are districts that we call nomes. Nome is a Greek word, but it is the word that we use to describe these districts. So this was the capital of the second nome in Lower Egypt. But as you can see, like if you look around, you can see all sand everywhere. This looks like the temple's not very well cared for. What actually happened here is that the city was kind of used for a bit, and then it was sort of semi-abandoned. In the game, the way that they've used this is that they have the antagonists hide there, basically. So they decide that they're going to use it for their own purposes. So that's why you've got all this sand. And this is actually very realistic as to what happens. As soon as you leave anything in Egypt, sand everywhere. This temple is devoted to a god that was associated with Horus. So that's why you're seeing all the falcon-headed imagery everywhere. Horus was the son of Isis and Osiris, sort of a god of kingship. Yeah, there you go. You see the face on that statue. So that's actually sort of a sphinx as well. Sphinxes in Egypt are not like Greek sphinxes. We don't really know a lot about them. They tended to come in pairs or groups, which is what you saw here. There was one on the other side as well. But they could also have different types of head on them. We looked at the Great Sphinx earlier and you saw it had the face of a human. But you could also get ram-headed sphinxes and falcon-headed sphinxes like the ones that we see here. And the reason they're like this is because the temple is associated with an aspect of Horus, who was often depicted with a hawk's head. Ooh, not sure about those rugs. All right, so we're looking at kind of associated buildings. So we've gone out of the temple, but these buildings are in the courtyard within the enclosure wall, so they would have been associated with the temple. Now, we don't have super many examples of things like this, because what tends to happen is that modern settlements are built on top of the old settlements. So you don't always get to know kind of what the layout of places would have been like, or how many subsidiary buildings they would have had. This building that we're currently looking at actually looks a little bit, it looks very Egyptian. Like the colours, the design, are indeed quite Egyptian. But the sort of idea of the plastering and the painting like this kind of reminds me a little bit of Pompeii, because that's the sort of thing that you used to see there. And that's kind of where we got evidence for what plastered walls look like. This area is within the temple walls still, and it's nice that it's different to some of the other temples that we might look at in, say, Thebes, because this area is much more lush than that. It's closer to the river, so you would expect to find plants and things growing kind of much easier, more places. So it's kind of nice. And we know that there were gardens often inside temples. So the fact that these things are here kind of really looks quite nice. Right, so we're taking the boat now. Going to go across the river. This boat that we're on, aside from the fact that it wouldn't go this fast, obviously, it's not terrible. I actually quite like it. I think that it's in shape, it's very much like the types of boats that you would get on the Nile. Going for a boat ride on the Nile is something that I would definitely recommend to everybody. If you ever get to go to Egypt, go on a fluka. Sailing down the Nile is just wonderful. It really gives you as well a good sort of contrast to what we were looking at earlier. We were at Giza, we were totally in the desert, basically. It's just sand everywhere, nothing really growing. The Nile Valley is so green and so lush that the difference is always amazing and astonishing to see. One of the things that I have to do a lot is look at satellite pictures of Egypt. And it's one of my favourite things to do, actually, is to look at pictures of Egypt at night, because you can see all the lights and you can literally just see the shape of the Nile Valley. It's amazing. Oh, we're looking at a hippo. It's a good job that we're in the Discovery Tour, because if we weren't, that guy would be hurting us. Hippos were pretty common in Egyptian iconography. They viewed a lot of animals as being associated with different gods. So they kind of had properties that were associated with the god. And obviously, if you want a god to protect you, you kind of want them to be fierce. You want them to be able to protect you. So that's why a lot of gods that had protective qualities, like Sobek, that we are just about to talk about, were actually dangerous creatures. And they, could kill you. So we have arrived at Krokodilopolis, also known as Shedet. We're just going up to the temple here. The statues there are actually quite interesting. I think that you didn't tend to get colossal statues of gods. There's a lot of colossal statues of kings, but not really of gods. However, the head that they've used on this statue is very like a much smaller real statue of Sobek. And I think it's really nice that they have made the effort to actually have details like that. As we're walking through here, there's actually quite a lot of different people inside of here. It's not totally unrealistic. The kind of courtyard areas of the temples would be places that people could go. What's nice about this is that you can see that there are flowers on the floor and sort of leaves, lots and lots of things kind of scattered all around the temple here. This, I don't want to say it looks messy or anything like that. It doesn't look messy. But the way that it's depicted here is very much something that started to happen in 19th century paintings. So in the 19th century, Europeans were visiting Egypt, and they were getting their first taste of what ancient Egypt was like. They were collecting things and they were making drawings. It's the first time people started to accurately like measure things, and they were really trying to imagine what life was like. So the paintings included all kinds of life activities happening.
Niger. Septen Tepiamet.
So what we're watching Aya do here is she is dedicating this crocodile mummy to the statue of the god, and she's performing some sort of ritual. We don't have a huge amount of information about the types of rituals that people performed, but that's fine. This is perfectly possible. And the little crocodile mummy that she has in front of her there, we actually do think that people used to use these as kind of cult images of the god. So there are so many crocodile mummies and other animal mummies that we think that it was kind of like a business where people could buy one and then you would dedicate it yourself to the god, and you could ask the god for some sort of favor. So that's what we just watched, a kind of representation of her doing there. We know of this happening in other places as well. So at Memphis, where the god Ptah is the main god of Memphis, he had an animal called the apis bull. The apis bull was known as the bar of Ptah. It embodied the kind of strength of the god. And the apis bull was a sacred animal, same as the crocodile that we have just viewed here. So as part of the kind of cult here, there was a crocodile who was viewed as an actual god. We call him Petsuchos, which again is a Greek word, but it means son of Sobek. And the priests in the temple would have been looking after the actual Petsuchos, which was a living creature. So again, imagine how that must have gone. So we're walking through the streets now. This is kind of the regular people's houses. I love the little band. They're so good. But yeah, we don't have a huge amount of evidence for towns just because it's underneath the modern towns mostly. The most evidence we have for that are places where the town was sort of built slightly outside of, you know, the normal, or there was a part of the town was built slightly outside of the main area. So for example, in Thebes, there is a town at Deir el-Medina, and that is a workers' village. So where we have workers' villages, we can see what the layouts of houses were like. In the game here, we've got this being the Ptolemaic period. We've also got quite a lot of Greek influence on some of the buildings, which makes total sense. By this time period, in the reign of Cleopatra VII, the Greeks would have already been there for 300 years. So, you know, it's perfectly reasonable to assume that they would have built their own types of buildings, and that even their type of building would have had some impact on the way that Egyptians built. So that's what we're seeing here on the right hand side now, is a much more Greek style structure. The ones that we just went past were very much more kind of Egyptian type buildings. Oh yeah, we've also got mosaic floors. Alright, so we are on what we would probably call a processional way here. It is sort of a paved area that's leading up towards the temple. And what we're looking at here is a procession that is ready to take the cult statue of the god back to the temple. The bark that they're all carrying is not something that we have. I don't think we have any real examples of this, but we have a lot of examples of depictions of this type of thing on temple walls, because there are quite a number of different processions for different gods that we do know about, where the cult statue of the god that lived in the sanctuary, so like the deepest part of the temple, and that would have been periodically taken out to different places, say to visit another god in another temple, or as part of some sort of rejuvenating festival for the king. Things like that happen fairly regularly certainly in Thebes. So it's very, very reasonable to think that it would have happened in other places as well. I'm just climbing up the gateway here, the pylon. In terms of temple architecture, they really did nail it, actually. Having a big gateway like this, as you approach the temple with the flags, the pillars for the flags there, is what we think that would have looked like. And the sort of, even though in the game a lot of the areas are a lot smaller for game reasons, let's say, what you look at, the way that the temple works, is generally quite good, I think. You know, they made a lot of effort to try and make it feel authentic and to include things that you really would see there. Thank you for joining me today as we explored ancient Egypt through Assassin's Creed Origins. I hope you had a good time, because I did. If you would like to find out more, please check out the Echoes of History channel.